It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Davis Hahn and Steve Hatfield. So, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to give some background on our esteemed panelists. Davis Hahn. Davis is a district representative for California State Senator Ben Allen. Senator Allen represents the 24th Senate District covering the West Side, Hollywood, South Bay, and Santa Monica Mountains, whoop whoop, communities of Los Angeles County. He chairs the Senate's Environmental Quality Committee and co-chairs the legislature's Environmental Caucus. He authored SB 54, which is groundbreaking legislation to address plastic pollution that became law last year, which we'll talk about soon. Davis has a BA in political science and public policy from the University of Southern California and helped organize a statewide coalition of grassroots support behind SB 54. Prior to joining Senator Allen's office, Davis worked on more than 50 congressional and state legislative campaigns nationwide in the 2018 and 2020 election cycles. Welcome.
Thank you.
Steve Hatfield is head of ESG, which most of us know, Environmental, Social, and Governance, for the U.S. division of the Carlyle Group. He leads ESG integration throughout the investment lifecycle across the portfolios, including partnering with portfolio companies to drive total business value through targeted ESG initiatives. Steve joined Carlyle from Cerberus Capital Management, where he developed and led the ESG portfolio company engagement strategy that included a program to systemically identify and execute opportunities to drive commercial value. Prior to joining Cerberus, Steve advised clients on a wide range of ESG topics in PwC's Sustainable Business Solutions practice. He holds an MBA in Sustainable Business and Renewable Energy from Marylhurst University. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you both have very impressive backgrounds. Davis, you come with kind of a unique politics and government perspective, and Steve, you come with a kind of unique business perspective. So let's start by asking both of you, when it comes to sustainability, what do you think actually mobilizes people to take action? And Davis, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that question, and hello, everyone. It's so great to be here with all of you today and see so much energy and passion for the cause of sustainability in one room. I think today we're seeing more people than ever before getting involved and engaged in the fight to build a more sustainable future. And I think a big part of the reason is, more so than ever before, if you just look around, the impacts of the choices we've made in the past of non-sustainable industry and our over-dependence on finite natural resources have never been more evident. And so many of those impacts seem just irreversible. And they're causing a lot of damage to a lot of communities. From our worsening climate crisis, I mean, my goodness, for those of us who live in California, I think we have whiplash going from this historic 20-year drought to all of a sudden the last couple months just being inundated with powerful storm after powerful storm. I know folks up in the San Bernardino Mountains who are literally trapped in their houses right now because they've never gotten this much snow at once before. We've had our 5 worst wildfire seasons in California history just in the past 7 years. So there's the climate crisis, but there's also another dual crisis from our lack of environmental stewardship in the past. That's the biodiversity crisis. We have thousands and thousands of species that are going extinct every year, and I don't think we've fully grappled yet with how that may impact us in the future. So I think folks are looking around. They're scared about whether they're going to have a habitable planet in 50 years. They're also seeing a lot of natural resources and environments that they've treasured growing up, and they're worried that they're never going to be the same again. So I think that's one reason that folks are paying attention. But as you mentioned, I have a background cutting my teeth before I got into the government advocacy space, working on political campaigns. So I've overseen programs that talk to voters in several dozen states across the country, talking to all types of people. So I've heard from lots of different types of people who say that protecting the environment and promoting sustainability is important to them. And their answers for why were remarkably similar. I think everyday folks, no matter where they are, they want to feel safe, and they want to feel like they're going to have enough money in their bank account every month to get by. Well, we know that environmental disasters are dangerous, whether it's their long-term health impacts from exposure to pollution and toxic chemicals to the more acute impacts of these ever-increasing in regularity severe weather events that we're seeing. And this costs a lot of money. It costs money to everyday consumers, it costs money to businesses, and it costs a lot of money to governments. And so the last point that I'll talk about is I think something that really does mobilize people. You know, we are in a free market capitalist society, and that has so many great benefits for all of us. But it also means that for folks like me who are involved in public policy, the best policy solutions, whether it's sustainability or any other issue, find a way to engage the free market and find a way to create financial incentives for the market to choose sustainable solutions.
Great, amazing. I think that's so also like touches on a lot in terms of like how people view sustainability. Like you said, it's become just a way of life, not just a specific like political point or any type of point. It's how we're living. So following to you, how do we get people also to mobilize from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me today. It's great to be here with you all. I feel a lot of energy in the room, which is great. I know probably a lot of you are spread out, and it's nice to be all together at this time. And hopefully you can keep that energy bottled for the rest of the year. I was with my team about a month ago. It was in Miami, and it was warm there. I feel like we didn't get that for LA. I'm a little bit disappointed coming from DC, so maybe next time. A little bit of background on the views that I'm going to give you today. So I work for the Carlyle Group, which is a partner of Beautycounter. We're an investment manager. We have about $330 billion of assets under management. So I oversee our US portfolio for ESG. I look over about 100 companies. Beautycounter is my favorite. Don't tell anybody else. You make my job a lot easier because you're so amazing at sustainability. It's fantastic. When you came into the portfolio and we started the partnership 2 years ago, I was thrilled. My wife was very thrilled because she loves the products, which is fantastic. But I want to talk to you all today about a company's perspective on mobilizing people and what it means for companies like Beautycounter to engage on ESG. So again, I work with about 100 different companies in the US. And in terms of mobilizing people for action, I've really seen a groundswell over the past 5 years. I think after COVID, people had a recognition that we were burnt out on the norm. That was what was before. And a lot of people wanted to engage in their external passions. They wanted to bring their whole selves to work. They didn't want to just do the 9 to 5, punch the clock, be about whatever their job was. They needed something broader than just that job. And so what we found with a lot of our companies is you need to tap into people's personal passion. I imagine all of you here have personal passions of why you're here. Why you chose to work with Beautycounter, you probably have a lot of options, but there's something in your life that probably called you for personal reasons. That's what we found is incredibly important to folks, no matter what company we're working with. Tap into that personal passion. I guarantee you there's an environmental or social related item that they are passionate about. It could be working in their local community. It could be doing a trash pickup. It could be commuting to work, lower carbon transport. There is something there. The next piece that we found is having a shared vision. You all have an incredible shared vision for what the future should look like. And it was so amazing to hear the first panel talk about that and all the advocacy work you've done over the past 10 years. You have to help a company build that vision. Companies are being held to a higher standard than they were in the past. It's not good enough, but it's getting better. Regulations are driving us in a good place. I think companies do like that, those clear guideposts of where we need to head. But you need to establish, what is that shared vision? Why can't tomorrow be better? It should be better. What does that better vision look like? We have companies we work with on healthcare. We have companies that we work with in the utilities sector. We have companies in the industrial manufacturing space. How are they making a better society? And if you can get the employees to understand what the vision is for the future, they want to be part of that. They want to be something that's different than their 9 to 5, their normal life. The third piece is pride. I've heard a lot of you talk about it on the first panel, pride. This is an incredible company to work for and work with. A lot of our companies, the people want to go home and brag to their friends, brag to their families about what they do in their job, that it means something, and it means something for their family members, for their future generations, the communities in which they live. And so if you can tap into that, I found that it's incredibly successful at being a motivator for change with companies to start to pull together pretty amazing ESG programs. And the great news I'll tell you is, because I've been doing ESG for 15 years ago, I'd tell people before it was cool. Because back then it was like, what is this? Another acronym, okay. everybody knows about it now. It's amazing. It's amazing to see the change in the past 5 years, and we'll talk about some of the hope that we have for the future, but that is certainly one of them. I've seen a huge paradigm shift in the past 2 years in particular.
Amazing. And kind of piggybacking off of that, you get to see kind of a wide range of businesses, obviously. You kind of alluded to that on their sustainability journey. What do you think enables a company to create meaningful change when it comes to protecting the planet?
Yeah, there's a set of, I think, key practices that companies need to embark on, and I will, spoiler alert, Beautycounter's been fantastic at all of these, and not just because I have you all in the room, it is truly incredible what you've done. We use you as again, a guidepost for other companies and what you should look to achieve. The first is buy-in from the top, and so Mark here in the front row, CEO of Beautycounter, fantastic to have his support and partnership, working with Jen, working with Greg in the past, and what they've supported. They understand the vision for the company and what you need to do on ESG. Incredibly important to have that buy-in from the top. You can't get very far without it. In your messaging to your customers, to your employees, to your investors, it also takes resources. Jen mentioned early in her comments that they've set a net zero target for carbon reduction. I don't know if anybody understands the full ramifications of that. That's huge. It's incredibly important. It's where the future is for all companies. We're going to talk a little bit about the extent of Beautycounter's footprint and thinking about your products from end to end. It's amazing to have products that are healthy for people, but they're only healthy if they also have healthy ingredients, and that the people who made those ingredients were treated in the right way, in proper working conditions. And at the end of that product's useful life, that it could be recycled and flow back in a circular process. So incredibly important to think end to end. And that takes me to my next piece, which is targets. Having targets connected to global societal norms. Net zero is the wave of the future for companies, and there are a host of systemic implications when you go zero carbon for a company. It goes throughout your entire supply chain. It's not only the fuels you use in your transport, it's the products you choose. Products have their own inherent carbon footprint. Using recyclable materials has a lower carbon footprint than raw materials. So a company to set those targets that are aligned with global expectations and commit to those, huge step in the right direction. The third piece is around understanding, I would say what's called triple bottom line accounting. Most folks don't love to talk about accounting, but we are investors. It is important to earn a return, but it's people, planet, profit. That's triple bottom line, right? And so it was coined by a writer in the 90s, John Elkington. And I think it's finally come to fruition in terms of how businesses manage themselves more holistically. What it means is that profit doesn't exist in a vacuum. In order to be successful as a company, you have to think about your environmental and social impacts. You have to both measure those, but you also have to have a cognizance of, as you take your business forward, what your decision making means in terms of those environmental and social impacts on your people, on your suppliers, on your customers. There's circles of influence, and it's incredibly important to understand those. So it's all about the targets, it's all about the tone from the top, and it's also about transparency. And so a lot of our companies today are held to a much higher norm than they ever were in the past about what are you doing as a company? What does your progress look like? Show me the data. Working a lot with Jen in your ESG report and thinking about where are you today on packaging? Having data that shows that progress, not just making qualitative remarks about we aspire to do this or we hope to be there on that. Actually tracking that progress. There's rigor behind that, and it actually produces substantive change for business. So those are the items I think that can most help a business to move the ball forward.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. And talking about company responsibility, Davis, you represent Senator Allen, who recently experienced a major victory with the passage of the, let me get through this because it is a tongue twister, Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. We're going to call that the Senate Bill 54, which is intended to make obviously a big impact in reducing plastics and waste and pollution. Some individuals in this audience are not from California. So first, can you give us a quick overview of the bill itself? And further, can you tell us what inspired Senator Allen to champion this specific effort?
So the most simplistic shorthand that I can offer for what the bill does, and I'll go into more detail about what it does in just a moment, is that it aims to phase out single-use, non-compostable, non-recyclable plastic in the state of California by the year 2032. But I want to start with the second part of your question of where this journey originated from, and it actually started in China back in 2017. So obviously our markets are pretty inundated with single-use packaging. You see it in the grocery store. It's been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic with our increased reliance on food delivery services, and dealing with the pollution caused by these products is a big problem. Well, up until the year 2017, our local governments who were in charge of cleaning up this pollution were actually selling all of their plastic waste, or most of their plastic waste, overseas to China. They were shipping about 4,000 barrels of plastic waste a day to China, and they were making money off of it too. And then China was handling the sorting of that material, the recycling, and the incineration of the non-recyclable material. Well, in 2017, China implemented what they called their national sword policy. They said, we're not going to buy this anymore. And that created a big crisis for local governments here in California, who are now having to deal with the increased infrastructural costs of sorting this waste, recycling it, building more landfills, and expanding the capacity of those landfills to the tune of 420 million taxpayer dollars per year. And who's really paying for that at the end of the day? It's folks like you and I, the average consumer who's seeing their waste hauling rates go up every month. And I don't have to mention all of the environmental impacts that come along with this, from all of that excess plastic ending up in our streams and our rivers. I have it written here somewhere, 8 million tons of plastic enter our oceans every year. I mean, that's just astounding. So Senator Allen first introduced SB 54 actually in 2019, because we knew that we needed a comprehensive approach to tackle this problem. A plastic straw ban wasn't going to cut it. A plastic bag ban wasn't going to cut it. So we first introduced the bill in 2019. It came very close to passing in 2020. We came 4 votes shy, but we ultimately weren't able to win over the support of industry stakeholders. So after that, environmental advocates put a ballot measure on the ballot for the 2022 general election that would have implemented the provisions of SB 54 with a funding mechanism attached to it. And so what happened was industry stakeholders who previously did not like our bill and did not really want to negotiate with us as much said, well, we don't want to spend all the money to fight this at the ballot measure and potentially lose. We've seen the polling. It looks popular with Californians. So let's come to the table. Let's strike a deal. Let's find an agreement that we can all be happy with. And that's what we did. We passed SB 54 last year. It was a huge, unprecedented accomplishment. And the bill really has 3 main components to it. Number one is source reduction. It requires by 2032, producers have to reduce the amount of single-use packaging they're putting on the market by 25% overall. Number two is that the remaining single-use packaging on the market after that source reduction needs to be either truly recyclable, meaning it can be accepted at a local recycling facility, not just that it could potentially be recycled under the right conditions in some lab somewhere, or truly compostable. And then the last part, the last component of this bill is something that we call extended producer responsibility. And what that's meant to do is take the responsibility for the end life of these products out of the hands of the everyday consumer and putting it on the companies who are producing these materials. And a component of that is a $500 million per year fund that will go to covering the costs of mitigating plastic pollution, 60% of which needs to focus on the disadvantaged communities that are bearing the brunt of the health impacts of this crisis. So we're tremendously proud of this accomplishment. It's by all standards the strongest anti-plastic pollution policy that's ever been passed in the United States.
That's amazing. Congratulations. And just those numbers alone, I don't know, they give me pause. I don't know if anyone else is feeling this way, where I'm just astounded. I can't even encapsulate how much plastic that actually is hitting our oceans and hitting our just bodies of water. It's wild. Lobbing it to you, Steve. The sustainability and ESG journey is quite complicated, and often it can feel like the initiatives are not quite connected. Yep. How do you navigate prioritizing your work when so many issues feel like they're urgent and require action today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's really two areas. One is understanding your core drivers as a business. And there's three things that I've been working a lot with companies this year on. One is regulations, two is your customer expectations, and three is how do the items through an ESG lens impact operational performance. I'll tell you, this is a tough year for ESG right now for a couple of reasons on business. One is we have inflationary pressures. We have economic headwinds. There's constant talk of recessionary pressure. It hasn't quite happened yet, so knock on wood. That's good. We also have political headwinds. But the good news is, from a regulatory perspective, we're seeing incredible progress across the board, more globally on ESG. And again, as a business, there are areas where regulation is incredibly helpful for business to forecast and plan out. And that's what we're looking for in ESG more and more. One of those areas is carbon. It's fantastic to see this. There's a few regulations that are very exciting that have come online recently. One is out of Europe called the CSRD. There's a lot of acronyms in this space. They're not as long as Davis's acronyms, so I think he wins on that one. But the EU CSRD is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. By 2026, it's going to require up to 50,000 companies to produce sustainability reports that haven't done that in the past. They have to explain their alignment with a 1.5 degree scenario, which is what Jen mentioned earlier, which is aligned with the Paris Agreement for what we need to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. There's also a whole host of supply chain regulations that have come online, which are forcing companies to look upstream in their supply chain and make sure the companies that they're working with are ethical in terms of how they're sourcing raw materials, but also how they're treating their workers. One of the most recent ones passed in the US was the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, or UFLPA. UFLPA asked companies to look all the way back in their supply chain. When I say all the way back, people don't often realize sometimes how complex supply chains are. A tier 1 supplier is your immediate supplier, but it could go back up to 5, 6, 7, 8 tiers. This law asks companies to trace back all the way and to make sure that they're not sourcing product from the Xinjiang region of China, which is contributing to the Uyghur forced labor issues. So that is a great thing to see. There's also acts coming out of Germany and the EU, the Corporate Sustainability Diligence Directive. We also have, obviously, in California, the Transparency in Supply Chain Act, which has been around for some time. And then UK, we have a Modern Slavery Act. This is a great thing to see. There's really a groundswell of regulation, and that's one of the first things that we're having companies focus on for driving change. The second one I mentioned is customer expectations. You all may not see this as much. This is more with what we call B2B models, but businesses that sell to each other. But increasingly, businesses are requiring their suppliers to have ESG performance standards. That means in order to do business with them, they require you to have a net zero target, require you to have a supplier code of conduct, require you to potentially have what's called an ISO certification, which is a best practice standard for things like health and safety, energy management. Not only are they requiring companies to do this, but they're scoring and rating on this annually. And if they don't meet these thresholds, they can't do business with each other. So we're seeing more and more where being a leader on ESG has become table stakes to be successful in this economy. That's a great thing to see. And then the last one's operating performance. So I mentioned triple bottom line accounting, but it really isn't rocket science that ESG is good for business. When you treat your workers well, when you keep them safe, they're more productive. They want to come to work. You have lower turnover. When you're looking at using a lower chemical profile in your operations, using low carbon energy, having things like zero waste to landfill, that decreased operating cost. Those are all things that contribute to both a lower environmental footprint, better social outcomes, and higher profitability for a company. So it's truly win-win-win when our companies can do this, and we believe this is the way of the future. Beautycounter is one of the leading companies on this, which has been fantastic. And as I said, my goal for other companies is to bring them up to your level. So.
Amazing. And speaking of Beautycounter and its amazing work, in 2020, Beautycounter launched an aggressive 2025 packaging goal to increase the recyclability, reusability, and refillability of Beautycounter's packaging. And the company is on track to accomplish this feat. Beautycounter spent the last year diligently reassessing climate goals and have committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions using science-based targets. But with all of that said, we know there is more work to be done. Davis, what would you say are key takeaways from Senator Allen's environmental work, and what does this mean for a brand like Beautycounter that is continuously striving to be as sustainable as possible?
Well, first of all, I really, truly want to commend Beauty Counter for these efforts, for getting way out in front of the rates and dates we set forward in our bill and showing the rest of the industry that this is possible, particularly on the reuse and refill front. Out of the 25% source reduction that I mentioned that's in our bill, 10% of that is mandated that it comes from reuse and refill. So thank you for being an industry leader, like I said, and showing everyone that this is a viable path forward. I think the main takeaway is that we need everyone at the table and everyone's voice heard when we're crafting these environmental and sustainability solutions. A big part of the reason that our first iteration of SB 54 failed is we didn't have that true engagement with companies and industry stakeholders the first time around. So we said we're going to have these mandates, and then we're going to leave a lot of the details to Cal Recycle, who's just going to be in charge of filling in the fine print and telling companies what to do. Well, obviously, industry didn't like that. So when we introduced the second round of the bill and we actually sat down and spoke to companies and said, what is going to work for you? What is going to allow you to achieve our shared goal of a more sustainable future while not impacting your bottom line? And we ended up with a solution called producer responsibility organizations. So now under our bill, a company that produces any type of packaging in California is going to need to be part of a producer responsibility organization, which is charged with producing a plan for how those companies are going to meet the standards set forth in our bill. Within those plans, you have a great deal of amount of flexibility in how to do that, so that you can do it in a way that's finely tuned to your own needs. So we really need to have government, grassroots advocates, and industry leaders working together on these issues. So whether you're here with Beauty Counter or another company, I encourage you to use your lobbyists and your government affairs representatives in your state houses, in your local city halls and county administration buildings, and in Washington, D.C., to make sure that your voice is heard and that you are part of the discussion when we're discussing these policies.
Amazing. Yeah, and it definitely speaks again to the impetus that it takes all of us to make this work happen, and these efforts are definitely something that we have to lobby for and talk to our lawmakers about. So I love that. Thank you. Steve, there's a sea of messaging around green and clean, and often consumers can feel overwhelmed. With these things in mind, can you speak to us about what is going right in the ESG space and what the major gaps are?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's start with what's going right. So what's going right? If you look over the past 20 years, there is a much broader understanding of the macro environmental and social issues facing us today. Some of them are quite scary, what we've seen today with physical climate change. Some of them are also scary in terms of increasing cancer rates. But there is a broader recognition of that. And I would say there's a smaller, although still steadfast portion of the population that may be in the denial camp for certain reasons. The next thing I would say is there's a broader recognition and acceptance of ESG. ESG 10 years ago, as I mentioned, people didn't know what it was. It seemed as fringe. Most of our companies did not have ESG programs. That is a complete 180 today. Every one of our companies has a head of ESG, has an ESG department, has ESG teams, has setting ESG goals. That is incredible. And most of that has changed, honestly, in the past 3 to 5 years. That's headed in the right direction. There's also a broader recognition of clean and green products. I know we talked about in the first panel in Dr. Zeto's class that there's still more work to do. There's more awareness, and we'll talk more about that. But there is a broader recognition. I think where the challenges remain is one on credibility. And so I think greenwashing continues to be an issue. There is more litigation and regulation happening now to snuff out greenwashing, to make sure that companies that do put forth claims, they are credible, they're validated, they're backed up by hard and fast data. For companies like Beauty Counter that truly put the time, effort, energy, and attention into doing so, keep doing what you're doing. The other companies will gradually fall out and they'll be called out. And we've seen more litigation happening right now. The second is around complexity of messaging. And something I've talked, I think, with various folks in Beauty Counter in the past. This can be a complicated space. There's a lot of terms, phthalates, parabens, BPA. I think you see some consumers that are very well educated and almost enjoy, let's say, reading about this. There are others that hear this and they turn off. And whatever we can do to simplify that is a huge step in the right direction. Now, I will give huge credit to Beautycounter. I love your Never list because it makes it simple for your buyers. They don't have to do the homework. It takes the guesswork out of buying your products because they know that you've put the hard work into it for them. We were trying to do that with other companies as well, and that is what we've seen today as the starting point. That's the table stakes. And so essentially, if we can keep moving forwards with regulation around greenwashing, of having companies have rigorous credentials in place, but then also that simplicity of messaging for what you're trying to serve to them with these products, what the benefit to them is in their lives, that makes a huge, huge effort in the right direction of simplifying. I think what we've seen in the past is a bit of complexity.
Moving from companies to individuals, like we said, there's not just Californians in the room. What can we do as individuals to advocate for environmental protection laws in our own communities?
Well, I'll go back to what Stephen said in our first panel. I mean, please reach out to your policymakers at every level. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your input. A big part of my job as someone who works on policy, but on the district side in our office, is that's where a lot of our policies originate from. They originate from taking meetings with folks in the community and hearing how these problems are impacting you in your everyday lives, and then working with you to develop solutions that can resolve them. So please reach out. The other thing that I will say is when it comes to plastic pollution, we really wanted SB 54 to be a turnkey model that could be directly implemented in other jurisdictions. So I encourage you to literally copy paste that bill text, and you can take it to a state legislative office in your home state and say, look, this bill is working in California. They're the 4th largest economy in the world. If it's working there, it can work here. And lastly, realize that sustainability is multifaceted. I think here in California, if you go up and down the state, talk to the average person, environmentalism is a big priority for them. We're a very environmentally minded state. That might not be true wherever you are. So I think it's important to know your audience and realize there are other facets of sustainability that you can emphasize to gain support for these policy priorities, whether it's cutting government budgetary costs and reducing taxes for everyday consumers, or whether it's mitigating health impacts for disadvantaged communities. Those are important conversations that we need to keep front of mind when we're looking at all of these issues, and they could be more effective in the middle of the country or on the East Coast, or even in other countries potentially, than just appealing to folks' environmentalist instincts.
I love that. That's great advice, and definitely something I'll be thinking about post-panel. For both of you, when you think about your work and the future of sustainability and climate change, what keeps you going? What keeps you hopeful? What's exciting about the future? And Davis, we'll start with you.
Well, I think what really gives me a lot of hope is that the coalition that's fighting for a more sustainable future just keeps growing. And it's more broad and diverse than I ever could have imagined that it would be. I don't claim to be that old and experienced in this field. I've only been working in it for about five and a half years. But even when I started, it was pretty few and far between to see convenings like this that were bringing together industry leaders and not just environmental activists. So that gives me a lot of hope. What's really exciting to me is that if you ask me where is the action truly happening on sustainability, on mitigating the climate crisis, I would tell you it's not Washington, D.C., it's not New York at the United Nations or Brussels at the EU, it's right here in Sacramento. In California, and it's why I love doing my job. We have a very unique position here in California that so often what we do, because of our status as the largest state by population, the largest state by economic output, what we do often dictates the market for the rest of the country and oftentimes the rest of the globe. We saw this with our fuel efficiency standards, which forced automakers to start selling more fuel efficient cars everywhere, not just just in California. And we're already seeing some evidence that the same thing is going to be happening with plastic and packaging, thanks to SB 54. So we're seeing a ton of groundbreaking policies on sustainability being passed in Sacramento year in and year out. We have a lot more work to do, but we've made a ton of progress, not just on plastic pollution. I mean, we're set to have 100% renewable energy by 2045, phase out the sale of gas-powered cars by 2035. These are things that were pretty unthinkable just a few years ago. And if we can do it here in California, we're showing the world that it can be done anywhere.
Yep. Well, there are things I'm hopeful about, but there are things, I'll start with the worries. As Janet said, there's a lot that keeps me up at night. We're moving in the right direction, we're not moving fast enough. And I say that as not to suck the wind out of the room, but it almost makes me think of, played lacrosse earlier in life, and we always did something called a fourth quarter drill. And what it was the game was 4 quarters. And sometimes teams will have a hesitancy to give it all they got in the fourth quarter. And the whole point of the drill was treat every quarter like the fourth quarter. That's where you all are now. You've done a lot of work. It's been fantastic. We got to keep going. There's more to do. Don't give up. It's for all the right reasons, but you got to keep the momentum going. One of the things that keeps me up, there's been a host of anti-ESG regulation coming online in the US lately. It's worrisome. I hope it's a flash in the pan. But it speaks back to our points of keep engaging with regulators and legislators. They need to hear from you, and it does make a difference. And as we've heard in other panels, they read your letters. They do want to engage. We can't stop now. And so I think we've made a lot of progress with ESG, but this is worrisome. And again, we're not moving fast enough. The physical climate issues that we're seeing, they're intensifying. They're getting worse a lot more quickly than projections said. We're going to have to move forward with both reduction, but also adaptation and resiliency at the same time. But what gives me hope is that, again, we're seeing in the past 3 years, I can't understate the groundswell that we've seen in the change of ESG being implemented and systematized at our companies across the board. Companies that never would have engaged on ESG in the past. That is huge. We also have many new employees, the companies that are hiring, they're asking about ESG. I talked in the beginning comments about being proud of the company you work for and wanting to do something outside of your daily role. They're not only evaluating a company on what the role is going to be and traditional things like what my pay is, and these days it's work-life balance and work from home, but it's also on who are you as a company? What do you believe in? What is your vision for a better tomorrow? And there are candidates who will turn down companies if they don't have the right answer. That's fantastic to see. We need more of that. We need more of, we talked in the beginning too about the awareness of your products, the awareness of clean and green products. We need to keep getting the message out. I mean, in my early days, I still remember in elementary school having a lesson about climate change. And wow, this seems really bad. Is anybody working on this? And it stuck with me, to this day. And so we need to keep teaching the youth, keep engaging, keep promoting awareness. So I'm hopeful that will keep moving in the right direction.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, the both of you. This was, I know, so informative, and so it gives me a lot of hope. So. Thank you so much.